guest on the show today is Sharon Salzberg. So Sharon is a bit of a legend in the meditation world. Particularly it's true, but she's been meditating for longer than I've been alive. Was one of the sort of innovators of the field, people coming from training in Asia and then coming back to the States, one of the co-founders of one of the main meditation centers in the US, in Massachusetts, I believe, author of several books. I was just hearing it interviewed by Dan Harris and Russell Brand, so I've got some footsteps to follow in here. Just reading her new book called Real Change. I'm sure we'll talk about that. And I just really like Sharon's style. I've been the last few days really listening to her interviews and reading her stuff. Just very down to earth, very accessible. And Sharon, I just heard you agreed to be a speaker at the Embodiment Conference. And then I said, let's get her on the podcast. So super pleasure to meet you.
It's very nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
And how did you get interested in meditation? And particularly, I'm interested in your story with the body. That's our kind of thing. So, I'd love to hear a little bit about your Genesis story.
Way back then, before you were born, I went to college at the age of 16. And when I was a sophomore, I took an Asian philosophy course. And that was the turning point of my life, really. Like many people, I'd had a very difficult, traumatic childhood, and like for many people, this was never spoken about, like in my family, and so I didn't know what to do with all of those feelings within me. And speaking of the body, of course, that's where it's all held. And I took this Asian philosophy course, and there were two things about it that were really important for me. One was in terms of talking about the Buddha, when the Buddha said life has suffering in it. This is a part of life. Then I realized that my whole life I'd felt like different and weird and outside of things. And it was this moment, this tremendous moment of feeling like, hey, I belong, this is like, I count too in a way, and then in the course of that course, I heard there was such a thing as meditation. There were practices you could do that were real, that were direct, that were pragmatic, and that if you practice them, if you actually put them into practice, you could be happier. So I was going to college in this city, Buffalo, New York, and I looked around Buffalo and there was nothing I could find. This is 1970. And so I created an independent study project for the university. I said, I'd like to go to India and study meditation. And they said, okay, that sounds good. And off I went.
Wonderful. And it's a hell of a difference now, listening to you and Dan Harris talking about his app, for example. We have the Headspace app, I think, out of the UK that's very popular here. It's a hell of a difference between being able to turn on your phone and turn on an app and having to go all the way to India. I'm curious about that difference.
Well, we talk about that difference a lot because nobody really knows like what it means. In my time, you had to be so highly motivated in order to find an actual practice, not just read about it. It wasn't even that easy to read about it, but you could find some books and stuff, but to actually know there were practices you could do that you could breathe life into, that was tough. And so usually you'd have a lot of suffering in your life, or you were so highly motivated. Like I went off to India. I'd never even been to California before. I'm a New Yorker. I'd never even been to the other end of the U.S. and there were many like me. And so we don't know. Nobody knows what it means, to be casual about things and like pick up an app or be in a health food store looking for something else and see, oh, there's something, maybe I'll get that too. But it's a different time. And so maybe the needs of people are different, and it's just reflecting that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of a middle generation in a way, in that I still had to get on the train to Devon to go to Gaia House, which is a sort of sister school, I think, to some of the, I feel like most of the meditating I've done has been within a very similar school from what I can gather. And the late, great Rob Babea at my first meditation retreat, Metta retreat.
He was a great teacher.
Very, very great man, underrated, underknown. And that was a metta meditation, which is kind of your thing, right? This is what you're most famous for, the METTA meditation. Maybe you could say what that is, because I feel like you're the sort of the grandmother of metta. That's how you're kind of known.
That's funny. The predominant methodology most people have practiced in this country, that was very much prevalent in India as well, was mindfulness practice or insight meditation. Mindfulness is considered the engine for insight. And metta, or loving kindness practice, was like a little subsidiary, it was like a little something extra you got to do now and then. It's about cultivating a powerful sense of connection and care for yourself, for others, and ultimately for all beings. And so the first time I heard about it was at my first retreat, and it was a little bit like a ceremonial way of saying goodbye. So this is 1971, January of 1971. And I thought, ooh, what's that? And I began to try to understand it. And I never had a teacher to guide me through really the intensive version of the practice till 1985, when I went to Burma for 3 months. And I was so moved by my experiences there that I came back and I'd already been teaching mindfulness, but I came back and started teaching loving kindness. And then I wrote a book. My first book came out 25 years ago, and it was called Loving Kindness. So I've been like a tremendous proponent of that practice ever since I learned it.
Me too. I did a few years of mindfulness, and like most people, that's what you first discover. And I was getting a little bit calmer and a little bit happier, but I wasn't really getting any nicer. And one of my teachers said, why don't you do a bit of metta? Why don't you do a bit of this kindness? And then the idea of was sort of preposterous to me at first, like practice kindness. And then he said, you have to say these phrases, maybe happy, maybe, and I'm just going to repeat these phrases. And I ended up at this retreat with Rob sort of by mistake. I think I could do that weekend and not any other one. So I thought, okay, I don't really know what it is, but I'll do it. And I thought, okay, Rob seems fine, so I'll repeat these things. It's a bit silly. And then, I was having very profound experiences within a few days. I was quite shocked. I mean, this idea of practicing kindness might seem a little forced to people, or a little sickly sweet, something like that. I heard there was a book by this woman called Sharon on loving kindness. I'm not reading a book on that, So like, what would you say to those kind of initial reactions people might have?
I think they're very common. I think there's two major controversies I've probably encountered in my years of teaching loving kindness. One is people think it's a stupid thing to do because it leaves you kind of weak and conflict avoidant and saccharine sweet and too gooey. But really, of course, we see it as a strength. It's a tremendous strength, not a weakness. And the other controversy is the idea that this can be trained. If you take like loving kindness and compassion as sort of sister qualities, a lot of people think compassion is something, it's like a gift. You either have it or you don't. And if you don't, you're out of luck. Whereas in Eastern psychology, they would definitely see it as something that can be trained, because these things are seen as emergent properties of how we pay attention. It's like if you're talking to somebody and you're not really listening and you're thinking about the email you need to write, then there's not that, you're not creating the ground for a sense of connection to grow. Or, these days we can translate it into Zoom or something like that, and you're, same thing.
Facebook Metta, if people find it hard to visualize, you don't have to anymore. You can just pull up the agreeable and disagreeable person on Google or Facebook. You don't have to visualize anymore. But, okay. I mean, sometimes I hear people talk about sending metta as if it was some sort of magic energy. Do you sort of see it that way, or do you see it another way?
I don't really see it that way, although I say that because that's a common way of saying it. And every time I say it, I think, whoops, maybe I should, we send metta. But the good thing about saying it that way is that it's meant to be an act of generosity. It's gift giving or offering. Like we start the offering of loving kindness to ourselves. And so phrases we're repeating might be something like, may I be happy? May I be peaceful? And people always say to me, well, who am I asking? I say, well, you're not asking anybody anything. It's like you're giving someone a gift, in this case, yourself. It's like handing someone a birthday card and saying, may you have a happy birthday. May you have a great year. May you be safe. May you be peaceful. May I be safe. May I be peaceful. And so the positive part of using a word like sending is that it feels like an act of generosity, but it's not really like a package, we're sending overseas or something like that.
Right. I mean, I've heard other people describe it as a sort of positive sort of self-brainwashing, like a kind of, I'm retraining my intentionality here. And I know some people emphasize the phrases, may I be happy, may I be well, may you be happy, may you be well. And Rob really brought to me with it was the body side of it as well. Say a little bit about the body's role in Metta, because some people just see it almost like a chanting process.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think any meditation practice is not just like an empty recitation, and it's not a cognitive exercise. So I wouldn't agree with brainwashing, but I'd agree with a bunch of the rest, because the way we pay attention is very powerful. It affects not only how we see things, how we think, but our whole being, because they're intertwined. You can't sort of have one without the other. And so, as we gather all of our attention behind a phrase or a sense of a being, I say being because it may not be a human being, maybe a puppy who, you're offering love and kindness to, or something like that. It's the complete wholehearted attention. It's that gathering of our whole being behind those intentions that does transform our field of intention. And the field of intention is so different than giving ourselves a lecture, Like when you talk about embodiment, I actually don't even think about mind and body. I think about somebody who lives within a space rather than just looks at it from a distance, or from afar. Like I know in this movement toward more and more research on meditation, I know people who've hired people to do the intervention, to do the training, so they could then research the people who were taking the class. And, they've hired people who asked for scripts so that they could just read off the meditation. And that's different, than having it come from such a deep place within that. Or, when I had a book called Real Happiness that came out 10 years ago. And I had it has a lot of guided meditations in it. And I had a big discussion with the publishing house because they told me they were going to hire an actress to do the audio version.
Right.
And I said, well, how are you going to find an actress who has enough meditation experience? It's not like a novel, they have to be saying.
It's got to be Uma Thurman. That's the only option there, isn't it?
Well, it could have been Uma, actually, but they didn't offer me Uma.
I can't think of anyone else. But
I insisted on doing it myself,
Good for you. And it makes it different. I mean, this is the embodied transmission piece, isn't it? And sometimes I think of this like, would I rather be read a book by the Dalai Lama read by Donald Trump, or would I rather be read the back of a cereal packet by Sharon Salzberg? Right. And in terms of which is going to leave me better at the end, it would probably be the cereal packet, with you. Yeah. So I feel like that state transmission is a key piece, isn't it?